Looks like we may have a quorum. Will the clerk call the roll?
Esri.
Here.
Berkson. Harper.
Here.
Kurtz.
Here.
Petrie. Here. Schrader.
Here.
Langenheim.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Thank you. Now, can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Second.
Any comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved. Do we have any communications? Hearing none. I would like to get the committee's approval to moving item 7 to the top of the list. Are there any objections? Okay. Item 7 is consideration of approval by ELUC committee to allow 30 days for public review of the final document, draft minor amendments to Land Resource Management Plan, LRMP. We have a public participant who wishes to comment on that. Mr. Yukon?
Well, I'd like to just introduce the item a bit.
What?
I would like to speak very briefly to introduce the entire item.
Okay.
If that's all right.
Proceed.
Okay. This before you is our annual recommendation or list of suggested minor updates to the county's land resource management plan. We have 4 minor amendments to propose, which will be introduced tonight. And one of these 4 is with regard, number 4, the item, is with regard to including recently available map information with regard to prime natural recharge areas in the county, locations in the county. And we have some guests tonight, Brad Yukon and Derek Winsley, which I just destroyed your last name, I apologize, who are here to describe that item a little more carefully and respond to any questions you may have. Thank you.
If the committee has no objections, Mr. Yukon, are you ready?
Flash this, I can set it up or not.
First and foremost, again, my name's Brad
Would you
Yukon.
turn on the...
It is on. My name's Brad Yukon. I'm manager of the Champaign County Farm Bureau, but also active in the regional water supply planning committee. There's too many acronyms in there. Anyhow, I'll get to that in a minute, but I want to first touch base on a couple things to make sure many of us are on the same page as it pertains to the aquifer before we get to the maps. That way, again, we all have a general idea of what we're talking about. First and foremost, the Muhammad Aquifer is a limited natural resource. It is one that we know a great deal about today, and more than what we did know 5 years ago, but one that we still have a lot to learn about. We're a long ways from knowing everything about the aquifer. I do want to point out 2 different myths that are out there about the aquifer, just to get those off the table. First of all, the water in the Muhammad Aquifer is not, I repeat, not from West Virginia. Some individuals that I talk to frequently about water often say that the water that we're enjoying each and every day is from West Virginia. That is simply not true. The soils on the east side of the aquifer do not allow such movement. The water that's in the aquifer that we enjoy today comes from right here through recharge. Second of all, the Muhammad Aquifer is not a flowing river. We're not talking about water moving underground like the Illinois River, like the Embraw, like the Mississippi River. The water is not moving like that. The water in the aquifer maybe moves inches, maybe 6 inches, maybe a foot per year, but it is not a flowing river underground. Those are 2 very common theories that people have about the aquifer. The area of the aquifer, I'll put a map into your mind here a little bit. The Muhammad Aquifer stretches roughly from the Watseke area to the north, south through Paxton and Rantoul, around, the key word is around Champaign-Urbana, down to Monticello, and then into the Illinois River after taking a turn north and west slightly. It heads towards the Illinois River. Overall, the aquifer covers 15 counties, or parts of 15 counties. So where does water come from here that we use in East Central Illinois? About 22% of the water that we use here in East Central Illinois comes from surface water, 10% from shallow aquifers, and about 68% comes from the actual Mahomet Aquifer. In 2007, the Regional Watershed Planning Committee, which I butchered earlier on, was created through an executive order with funding from former Governor Blagojevich. The committee works hand in hand with the Mahomet Aquifer Consortium, who was established earlier and assisted us with technical support and funding. 12 interest groups were represented on the Regional Watershed Planning Committee. Those 12 interest groups were agriculture, counties, environment, electric generating, utilities, industries, municipalities, the general public, which I represented, rural water districts, small business, the soil and water conservation districts, and water utilities. Our goal was to examine the supply of the aquifer, determine demand, and develop a management plan for the aquifer. Through assumptions, we looked at less resource intensive, more resource intensive, and remaining the same demand projections. At the end of the day, the most critical spot within the aquifer is right here in Champaign County. In fact, as water moves from east to west, we are pulling water backwards from the Monticello area for our use here in Champaign County. So again, in the 15 counties and of the use of the aquifer, you could say Champaign County has the bullseye on it. We did also examine surface water use issues and believe that those communities that rely on surface water must also do some planning. Those communities are Bloomington, Decatur, Springfield, and Danville. These 4 communities especially need to look at drought preparedness plans and make sure they are current. Our final report was approved in 2009 in our committee and was published. Among one of the things the report called for 3 items: additional stakeholder involvement, education, planning for the aquifer management on the regional level, not the state or federal level, and voluntary programs. We must, as we move forward, educate people on where their water comes from. I am convinced that 98 to 99.9% of the people don't know where their water comes from. As long as in the morning they can make a cup of coffee or their shower turns on so that they can take a shower, that's all they care about. That type of attitude we have got to change. We have got to educate people where their water comes from. A couple of key points about the report in that time period. One, the former governor, cut our 3-year funding after 2 years. So we did our report with actually only 2 years of funding, not 3 years. And prior to the approval of the report, I became chair of the committee and continued that role until mid last year when I stepped down as chair. I remain on the RWSPC committee, but not as the chair of them. So what have we been doing since the summer of 2009? Public outreach has been attempted through a variety of manners, from public meetings, letters to the editor, a water conference, teacher and classroom resources, and much more. In the last 18 months or so, the Regional Watershed Planning Committee has reconvened on a regular basis and are looking at developing a sample drought preparedness plan for communities, identifying and examining recharge areas, which I'll touch on here in a second, discussing water-related issues affecting the aquifer, as well as trying to secure funding both privately and publicly to update our 2009 report by June of 2014. And I will touch on that if the chair allows as well at the conclusion of my comments. So that gives you from 2007 to 2013 in about three or 4 minutes. So that's a lot of history. What I want to touch a little bit with you on specifically is what's in front of you or what's on the big screens that you can see. And again, Dr. Winstanley is with me to answer questions as well. So I am the chair of the drought, or not the drought preparedness, but the water management subcommittee of the Regional Watershed Planning Committee. And so what we are looking at and what we have identified in just the last several months is what you've got on the screen. So let me kind of walk through what you're looking at. These are from, you can see at the very bottom, they're from January of 2008 from George Roadcap, and you can see his title and his position there. What you're looking at is probably for the first time that we've been able to overlay on a map with some certainty some prime natural recharge areas. So you can look at that and you can see, to begin with, you can look in the middle, you see the two larger areas. In the middle there, that gray spot is Rantoul, so let's talk about that as a reference point. That is the community of Rantoul in the dark gray between the two larger areas. Those areas that have the striped lines through them, again, are what we are identifying with the best available science that we know today, and with making some assumptions, which is the best we can do today, is these recharge areas. So recharge areas are running in general south and east of Rantoul, and then north and west of Rantoul are two of the larger areas. Additionally, if you look in the upper or the right-hand side of that map, there is some recharge areas that remain in Champaign County that would be in the Penfield area or the Forest Preserve area of the Champaign County Forest Preserve. So that is north and east of Rantoul. Up there is some recharge areas generally around Penfield or the Forest Preserve area. The additional area, you will see one other larger area, and that would be on the bottom left, which would be around the Muhammad area. There's a little bit of an area, again, I'm saying in the bottom left. George is not prepared to say with a great deal of certainty that that is a recharge area. There are some, as he puts it, some unusual, funky, and strange things happening in those areas. Any of you familiar with Muhammad know that that area also has a large amount of sand and gravel removal in that area. He is not with confidence saying that that would be concluded as a recharge area in the county, but just it's marked on here because some unusual things are happening. In Champaign County, so again, to summarize this map, the three main areas are running south and east of Rantoul and north and west of Rantoul, and then again, north of Penfield in the Forest Preserve area. So those are three areas, again, I stress, with the best available data we have today, with some assumptions made that those are recharge areas. So what are we doing, the subcommittee that I'm chairing? On that is three other individuals off the Regional Watershed Planning Committee. Ansel Anderson, who represents the environment portion of stakeholders, and then Evelyn Never, who represents the counties. She is from Tazewell County area, is also on that subcommittee. And then we rely on Derek and Dave Larson as technical advisors. So what are we doing? We are in the process of developing a white paper that will explain this a little bit, lay this out a little bit, and what recharge means, these prime recharge areas. The white paper is in draft form. We've made many revisions to it. We hope to have a final white paper approved at the end of March. And at that point, it will be more than public. It will be posted on website, and we will be able to be shared with anybody. Some of you may have seen a draft of the document, and it literally is a draft. The draft that you may have seen has had many revisions to it. In fact, as of today, we made more revisions to it, just today and earlier this week. So it is a fluid document. We have started to reach out to stakeholders that either own land, live, or farm in those areas, to reach out to them and talk to them about what does recharge mean to you. Should the recharge areas be protected? If they are protected, whom should do the protection of the recharge areas? And again, what should be done to protect these areas? There are many examples of what's been done to protect recharge areas across the nation. Not a lot of examples in central Illinois, especially in east central Illinois. But across the nation, there are a lot of examples of how communities have protected recharge. Could some of those apply here? Maybe, maybe not. But again, our goal as of this point is to get a white paper that the public can have and understand in layman's terms, because water can be, and the hydraulics of water can be very technical. That's why Derek is here to answer any technical questions. So it can be technical. Our goal is to produce this white paper that will explain recharge, put some options out there for everyone, all stakeholders to consider when we talk about protection of it in layman's terms. So that is where we're at. Again, the end document will be approved hopefully at the end of the March. Who's going to approve that, you might ask? Since we are a subcommittee of the Regional Watershed Planning Committee, we feel that committee should be the one that approves it, and they meet in mid to late March to hopefully approve this document. With that, I will take any questions if anybody has questions.
Does anybody on the committee have any questions? Okay.
Hi, Brad. We had a lunch discussion about this. What I've been told, though there's no actual documentation, but best guess, is that these recharge areas are some of the fastest recharges they've ever seen, that some recharge areas take many, many, many years to recharge, but these recharge areas are a priority now because they seem to have a much quicker recharge of the aquifer than others. Is that what you have? That's what George, I think, mentioned to us at the Muhammad Aquifer Consortium meeting last month.
Yes, Al, I would say that that's correct. Again, through George's modeling and his data, the recharge in these areas is much quicker. Potentially, and how much quicker are we talking? You know, it's raining tonight, so how long will that rain take to get down to the aquifer outside of these recharge areas? Hundreds to thousands of years, potentially. In these areas, it may be as quick as 50 years. So it is a lot quicker according to his modeling and his data that he's put together.
So based on some of these maps and information that you're now gleaning with new technologies and better resources to identify these areas, do you feel that a part of that white paper might give us some priorities as to the areas that need to be protected from a 1 to 10 standpoint? Might these be one of the top priorities to protect because of its quick recharge versus other areas of recharge in that white paper?
I don't think there's any question that these will be, in our document, these will clearly be a priority, that these should be, if you're talking of protection of the aquifer in broad terms, and when I say this, I specifically mean in east central Illinois, Champaign County, because I'm not going to, we could be here another hour talking about the west side of the aquifer, which is just completely different function of the aquifer over there. Yes, these areas will probably be identified as these should be the priorities when you think of protection or management of it.
Thanks.
When you're talking about protection, what are you talking about here, big boy?
That's a good question, Stan. Again, in our document of the white paper, we will provide examples of what is being done around the country. Again, some of those could be used here and applied here. Others will just be used as an example. So my answer is not a good answer, not what you're wanting, Stan, as specifics. It'll be a work in progress. But the key is, I believe, that stakeholders such as landowners, the public environment, need to work together to identify to what degree everyone is comfortable to put some sort of protection in place. I think if that's the direction, all stakeholders need to be involved in that discussion in determining to what degree it needs to be protected.
I'd just like to jump in for the benefit of some of the newer board members to indicate that our county land resource management plan does include a natural resources goal with an objective about groundwater quality and availability, and specifically a policy to this topic, Policy 814, which reads, to the extent that distinct recharge areas are identified for any aquifers, the county will work to prevent development of such areas that would significantly impair recharge to the aquifers. So as part of the priority item for this, which is not in our current year work plan, it reads, monitor progress towards identification and mapping of distinct recharge areas in and adjacent to Champaign County. In the event that such areas are identified, amend relevant county ordinances to prevent development of such areas. Just wanted to point that out.
Any further? Go ahead.
Okay, I have a number of items. As this report is being written, and I haven't read a draft, oftentimes the reaction when citizens see that we have the potential for an increase of a resource, that it becomes more difficult to have the conversation that just because it looks like a potential increase, we still need to be thinking about future generations, 2050, on down the line. Is that being taken into consideration as to the wording being chosen in this white paper?
Yes, it is, and I can let Derek Winstanley address that as well.
Yes, it's very clearly geared to protecting sustainable use of water in the region. And by that we mean providing adequate supplies of water, so that's sufficient water quantity, and clean water, so that deals with water quality, for all future generations, not just today.
Okay, that's good to find that out. I'm on the website right now, and I was on the Mahana Aquifer Consortium website. Some of my questions, I think, potentially have been answered when you explained you didn't get the full 3 years' worth of funding from the state and had to pull back, because I see a number of informational gaps on the website that maybe it's all volunteer now that things don't get up there. Okay. Will this map be put up on this website very soon? I don't find it right now.
Yes, the map will be made public. I mean, again, George has that, RoadCap has that presently. Again, it will be included or part of our white paper that will be coming out in the next month or next 30 to 45 days. So yes, it will be a public document.
Okay, and then the second part, since you, your intent with this white paper is for educational purposes, have you considered putting a draft of the white paper up on the website so the public can start reading it, and maybe with some contacts in which they can convey ideas, concerns, et cetera, et cetera?
Patsy, at this point, because it is such a fluid document and we're on about our 4th or 5th draft, we would prefer our goal is to try to get it as outlined as possible before we do make it to the public, so that we're not backpedaling and making massive changes to it. We'd prefer to try to get our version right first and then open it up to the public. And by all means, comments will be allowed to be submitted or given to us, and explanations given of questions. But again, at this time, we'd prefer to get our message explained correctly in terms that we think will be understandable to the public first.
I can understand that thoroughly. I do hope that somehow it gets into the public domain when you're ready for our public comments, because some of the things that I see missing on your website and on the Muhammad Aquifer Consortium website is enough information for the public to know when indeed meetings are, you know, what's happened in the past, some of those things that would cause the public interest to peak and therefore come and participate.
Patsy, it's again, as I mentioned earlier, and I think there's a responsibility by many of us to educate people on what the aquifer is and where their water comes from.
Agreed.
As chairman of the Regional Watershed Planning Committee for multiple years, I will tell you I can count on one hand and probably with two fingers the number of times that we had individuals come to our meetings and speak during public comment period. It's just not something that's high on people's radar list until this last summer, when we get a little bit of dry weather and some communities start to put in restrictions on water use and washing cars and things like that. The issue rises to the front or to the front burner a little bit more when there's a drought. But prior to that, there was not a ton of interest by the broad amount of general public on this issue.
I understand that also. Thank you.
Well, I have a question. Go ahead. Oh, go right ahead. No.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, since you brought up the Forest Preserve, at my time at the Forest Reserve Board, you mentioned, obviously, on the map, 2 recharge sites, Penfield and Mahomet, and they just happen to be Forest Preserve properties now. The Penfield site, and what I find interesting is on these recharge areas, the Penfield Preserve, the Middle Fork Preserve, at one time was quarried for mostly sand and gravel, but mostly it was sand. So, and I know there's a lot of sand that can still be quarried up there, and part of it was brought to the attention of Forest Preserve since it was property up there, owned by the county, and quickly turned down by the board for preservation purposes. But obviously, the sand at those levels, those veins of sand, are quick recharge areas. And I think, looking back at after the Galvins finished mining sand down south of Mahomet, just right next to the Sangamon River, which is now Forest Preserve property as of 2003. Those 2 lakes there, and one of them happens to be the largest lake in Champaign County. The smaller one, actually, when the Sangamon overflows, goes into the smaller lake down there at Riverbend Forest Preserve. But the larger one is a naturally fed lake. And at one time, I think about the time that the Forest Reserve acquired that property, the city of Decatur sent representatives over. They felt so confident about that natural spring supply from that lake that they were inquiring to see whether or not there could be water purchased and pumped down from the Sangamon to Lake Decatur. So it's obviously a very high quality recharge area if that can be accomplished. I guess that's my point brings a question is it must be where those sand veins are where we get the quick recharge areas and the subsurface. And I assume that's probably where we're seeing those sand veins where the red maps are, or the red lines are. Is that correct?
I would say in general that's an accurate statement, John. I grew up, some of you know and some of you probably don't know, I grew up in that area kind of south and east of Rantoul, and indeed there is some gravel pit mining up in that area, in the Gifford area. And around that area, there's no question that the makeup and the geology of the soil has a role in recharge.
I could just add, yeah, these recharge maps, the red areas, were specifically drawn based upon soil types. So we know which are the sandy soil types. So those provide the boundaries for these recharge areas. What is very difficult and much more challenging is to ask ourselves what happens to the water when it infiltrates the soil in these sandy areas. Does it in fact directly recharge the Mahomet Aquifer below? And that's where the complexities arise, because the geology is incredibly complicated. And I think that's why we're taking our time trying to get this white paper right, trying to get consensus among technical experts on expressing what we know and what we don't know. So I think it's important to take our time finishing this white paper, which will be soon, and then it will be available to everyone. But we're also taking great care not to use technical terms. If you ask geologists and hydrologists about aquifer recharge, they'll quickly put you to sleep using terms like transmissivity and conductivity, and you know, you're gone already. So we're avoiding all those terms and trying to put everything into layman's language. That's another reason it's taking us a little longer. Thank you.
I just wanted to make one point of clarification that I understood from my conversations with George Roadcap. The location maps that you see on the screen are derived from this published report. So the locations alone, but is that incorrect?
No, that is not quite correct. You have 3 diagrams that you're proposing, including the first and second diagrams are taken from that report. The third one is something that George has produced in the last month or so at our specific request, which is not in the report.
Okay, I assumed that it was a layer based on the report.
No.
So that's good clarification to have.
Also, if your figure 1, the conceptual model of groundwater flow, is taken from that report, which we used in an earlier version of our white paper. As of yesterday, that has been superseded by another version. It may be superseded again before the next few weeks, but I would caution against putting these diagrams in your plan for the next few weeks until we have an opportunity of finalizing them.
That's great to know. Thanks.
So sorry, John, very long answer to a question or comment that you made.
No, not at all. I appreciate your response. Thank you.
One question or one request. I would like to hear you cite off some of the specific actions taken to protect these input areas that you've come across.
Sure, I've got the document.
While Brad's looking up what we've drafted, there's most of the work in Illinois to date to protect recharge areas has been done in connection with water quality and prevention of contamination under the Illinois Clean Water Act.
I'm not restricting my request to Illinois. I'm making a general request.
I'm just starting with what we know, what's being done in Illinois, and then we can broaden that to other parts of the country. Throughout the country, most of the efforts that have gone into protecting recharge areas is to protect water quality. Because recharge areas means that the water is going in very rapidly compared with other areas, which means that those recharge areas are also the most vulnerable for water quality degradation. So most of the efforts in Illinois and other parts of the country to protect recharge areas have focused on preventing pollution.
Do what?
Preventing pollution.
Pollution.
Correct. Preventing pollution. Okay. And that's also true in Illinois on the work that's been done. There are several regions identified under the Illinois Clean Water Act to prevent pollution in recharge areas. This is not one of the designated areas. The nearest designated recharge area that's under protection from Illinois Clean Water Act is the Central Region Groundwater Protection Planning Area, which covers Mason, Tazewell, Gifford, and Peoria counties at the western end of the aquifer. And there they have a very active committee focused on pollution prevention. There's a lot that they do on educating people about the importance of protecting the recharge areas. They promote, very active in promoting, for example, the sealing of abandoned wells, wellhead protection, and they also have ordinances to prevent pollution by chemical plants, for example. There is a lot of activities, they're very active, primarily focused on pollution prevention. So I think in Champaign County, where we're now identifying these new recharge areas for the Mahomet Aquifer, you need to consider both water quality and water quantity for protection. And I'm just pointing out what's been done in some of the other areas, which is primarily for water quality protection.
Thank you.
Just to follow up with that, you mentioned on the western side over in Peoria County and other counties. What's their funding mechanism for that consortium or whatever they're called?
It's mainly voluntary. They are funded to some extent. It's a USA EPA-led program.
Okay.
Sorry, Illinois Environmental Protection Program. It's a state program with funding from IEPA, a limited amount.
So just for clarification, you also mentioned we should probably be looking not so much only at preserving the quality, but also the quantity over our recharge areas, so.
Correct.
Okay. I mean, that's got to be, I don't know, that's got to be a hard number, I guess, to figure what kind of withdrawal we can pull out of those areas without actually doing some and finding out what we can and can't get away with in those areas. Would that be a close to correct statement?
It's a very difficult challenge. I mean, the computer models that Dr. Rokap has developed is one method of being able to simulate withdrawals and their effect of withdrawing water on other areas. Champaign County, obviously, most of the water is withdrawn by Illinois American, just west of Champaign, about 21 million gallons of water per day. The total water withdrawals in Champaign County on an average day is about 32, 33, 34 million gallons a day. All that withdrawal creates a cone of depression, drawing down the water levels in wells finished in the aquifer. The biggest drawdown is at the center of production, west of Champaign. But right up to these recharge areas, Rantoul and northern Champaign County, are affected by that withdrawing water from other parts of the county. So it's not just a small-scale effect, it's a county-wide effect of withdrawing water. And it's of county-wide importance to protect these recharge areas.
So it could be a cumulative effect?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'll stop there.
Yeah.
Thanks. Brad, I don't want to put you in a difficult position, but I want to go a little further on protection. Our LRMP obviously states protection of these recharge areas. The Farm Bureau may have a different version or a different definition for protection versus what we may come up with for the LRMP for protection of the recharge areas. Can you give me any idea of how the Farm Bureau might want to come down on this issue, private property rights versus public concerns and safety for the aquifer and its recharge points?
I think at this point, I think that one, what I've mentioned earlier, we've started to work with stakeholders, and I think, again, all stakeholders will need to be involved. But the first group we've reached out to is landowners that are involved in production agriculture in these areas. Obviously, these areas primarily lay within the unincorporated areas of the county, so they also fall under the county's jurisdiction to an extent, or to a great deal, you could say. But again, you're right, it talks about private property rights. I think it'll be a balance that needs to be discussed and needs to be discussed by all the stakeholders. Again, whether that be by a governing body, whether that be by the landowners impacted by it. Again, I cannot give you specifics of this is what we're thinking, this is what we're talking about. But again, we've reached out to stakeholders, we've begun that conversation with stakeholders and trying to get their input. Again, who should manage the aquifer and these recharge areas? You know, what type of group is it? What should be done to protect them, and how should they be implemented? I think we're a ways away from getting concrete answers, but again, I can't stress enough, the stakeholders need to sit down and talk about this and work together Because as Patsy alluded to, this just isn't us here. This is future generations. And without the aquifer, we don't have to worry about economic development in this county. There will be none, because without water, there is nobody will want to live here.
Okay, this is sort of a side question, but I am interested if in your white paper you'll be including such items on your own webpage. You have the article from the State Journal Register about what the water company that services Springfield is offering in the way of incentive monies for replacing toilets, low-flow toilets, therefore saving money. This isn't happening in our area at all. I haven't ever heard our water company talking about that. So my macro question is, as you're working on things that are being done in other parts of the country for protection and reducing use of water, is something like this and other like kinds that are happening across the country being included as options for communities to be considering? Because many communities across the United States have started mandating, not just, would you please?
Patsy, is in regards to the white paper that we're producing or working on right now, the answer is no, it will not be included in the white paper. But I will tell you, water conservation is a key aspect that our subcommittee, the Water Management Subcommittee, will be addressing. We have done public conferences, and we as a Regional Watershed Planning Committee have talked about conservation of water extensively. Whatever those may be, from low-flow toilets to shower heads, etc., to the simple thing of when you're brushing your teeth, turn the water off. Are any of those three things going to save the aquifer? No, not singularly, but when you put them together, they're all going to add up. And then there's obviously the bigger ideas of conservation that municipalities can do some of that to encourage that in their new development. Businesses can do that. And I think one of the bigger things is the use of gray water. And when you think of gray water, we're talking wastewater, not drinkable water. The use of that water for such things as fighting fires or irrigating golf courses. Some communities are saying, no, we should not be using drinkable water to put back on golf courses or to fight fires with. That costs major dollars to put in infrastructure to transport gray water around your community. Is it being done? Absolutely it is, by communities across the country in some places. But that is a massive infrastructure cost that they're doing to put a separate pipe in next to your drinkable water to deal with those type of issues. And there are some manufacturers that have identified themselves that they could use gray water in some of their water process that they use in their manufacturing. So are those all solutions? Absolutely it is, Patsy. And absolutely those are things that we need to look at. But again, that is probably our next step. Our first step is to look at recharge and focus on that. But water conservation has to be part of the answer as we move into the future.
Obviously, you guys have put a lot of work into this, I can tell. And you're right, everybody's got to be proactive and up front. But you sound like you studied, and I'm just sitting here from an ag standpoint. Like out in Nebraska where they've irrigated for years, are they having problems with water level or contaminations or anything like that?
I'll let Derek. I mean, they have dewatered aquifers in the West,
Okay.
and that's where the Ogallala out in that area, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma area, they have dewatered the entire aquifer, and that's where water rights have gotten to be a big deal in the West. We're not at that point where we have dewatered aquifers. There have been drawdowns that we've identified both in the Muhammad aquifer and some of the shallow aquifers. But we're not to that point. And Illinois water law is much different than it is in some of those states. Illinois water law, and Derek can chime in and correct me if I'm wrong, goes by the law of reasonable use, and that's been established by the Illinois Supreme Court. Now, even though the Supreme Court's ruled on that, it's still a little bit fuzzy and gray, but basically says you own a parcel of any size, you can put a well down and extract water. So taking that to the extreme, could a city of Bloomington Normal, a city of Chicago, et cetera, that's not over the aquifer, buy a parcel, put down a well, and pipe it? Absolutely they can, with the law that is in existence today. However, our group, the Regional Watershed Planning Committee, does not have a strong interest to go about trying to change water law at this point in the state of Illinois. That is another animal and beast all to itself.
So in other words, if I want to put irrigation in, I better get ahead of John Jay and John Schroeder?
You got it.
And then agriculture is treated even a little bit differently under the law.
Okay.
So.
Well, and how about you?
I wanted to suggest that we remove item 4 of the minor amendment and add it later, like in April, when the white paper is published. Did you hear me? It's the item we've been talking about, the addition of the map about the prime natural recharge areas. It's on page 13 of 36 initially, and then is detailed as mentioned on page 19. Okay, sorry. So it's this fourth item, the fourth part of the amendment. It would be advisable, given the information provided this evening, that this location map is more accurately not referenced in this published report and will be referenced in the white paper. I would advise that we wait until the white paper is published, which is probably likely to be in April. It's great that we got the information out before you today, but it's advisable to wait to include this as an amendment in April, this one part.
I don't think the originator of this document has to have the permission of this committee to change it.
Okay, this is the item that's going to sit here for a month.
We're not voting
Yes.
on anything today.
Right, it's just going to sit here for a month.
So if you want to take it out, take it out.
Okay.
Any further comments?
I would add one other thing, and perhaps I didn't explain this on the map. There is some very narrow areas on the map. Any of you familiar with the county, as I know all of you are, would know that, for example, some of that follows the Sangamon River between North Mahomet and then up north. Those are basically points along the rivers. Those are not considered prime natural recharges comparison to the other areas. Those are just simply areas along the river that have been identified, but again are not considered per se the prime natural recharge areas.
You want? Okay.
I have a last information question, just out of curiosity. I understand and appreciate the complexities of the aquifer. What was the trigger mechanism that helped Mr. Roadcamp make these recent observations? I don't want to say discoveries, but observations, because they obviously were there. They just had not been observed. Could you give us just a quick understanding of that?
I'll give you a two-part answer. Derek will take the second part, and I'll take the first part. The recharge areas have been out there a little bit. There's been belief that these recharge areas have been there. There's been speculation and talk amongst the general public of where there may be recharge. But again, Patsy, and Derek will answer the technical side, but it's more here in the last several months that our subcommittee has really encouraged George to say, well, instead of just saying it's north and or south and east of Rantoul, lay this over some maps. Show us where we specifically are talking about, or lay it over a plat map type thing. And that's the reason here in the past several months that we've actually been able to get a map like this. Derek can maybe address the sort of technical how this has more come about.
Yes, the proposed figure 2 that you have in your attached material is a pretty large-scale map showing recharge on a very small scale in Champaign County. You can just see a couple of patchy areas. That was in the 2011 water survey, water geosurvey report. So it's really through the Regional Water Supply Planning Committee and the Management Subcommittee that's following a recommendation from the 2009 report to focus on recharge that we've taken this up and asked George to produce that mapping in greater detail. And also, it's encouraged a lot more discussion between scientists at the Water Survey and the Geological Survey and other organizations who have different views on what's going on in the aquifer and how recharge works. So through the committee and through the RWSPC, we've been able to get these different competing views together, and hopefully we'll come out with a consensus view on what we know.
Are you planning on drilling additional wells for testing?
Yeah, the answer is with anything, as I said several times, the document is a draft document, but we are making certain assumptions. What do we need to learn and to further our information and to solidify our assumptions and the data that we know today is time and money. And part of that money would go to wells, looking at wells, but it's going to take time and money. How much time and money? I don't know, but that's what it boils down to. We need to continue to study the aquifer. We need to continue to look at the resources so we can better understand the aquifer more than what we know now, which again is a lot more than what we knew 5 years ago.
The Mohammed Aquifer Consortium and the Regional Water Supply Planning Committee themselves do not fund research or dig wells. They encourage other people to do the appropriate planning and appropriate research, but they do not conduct research themselves. So it would be the Water Survey and the Geological Survey who would hopefully drill some more wells. So we're also encouraging them to come out with a combined research agenda on what needs to be done to fill some of the information gaps that we know exist.
Okay. Any further questions?
Mr. Chairman, would you like for me to speak to item 6B on your agenda, or would you prefer not that to happen?
Item 6B. Sure, why not? Does the committee have any objections to moving to 6B right now? Okay, well, let's do it. I believe you have something to say about 6B, and then,
Well,
okay.
Are you done with item 7? Do you not have to accept and place this on file so that it's on the record officially?
Well, I think we are. If
Oh,
nobody has
Mr.
anything
Chairman?
further to say about it, we're done with it.
there are 3 other parts to this item, but we haven't described them, the minor amendment. I could, if anyone had any questions, I could review any aspect of those other 3 parts, essentially which involve including updated information in our volumes 1 and 2 about that reference best prime farmland based on all of the updates that happened during 2012. So essentially just changing out the tables and maps that reference best prime farmland. That primarily is what the other items are, plus updating the municipal boundaries and the automatically extended 1 1/2 mile extraterritorial jurisdiction lines. So the other minor amendments proposed are very mechanical, kind of automatic types of changes. And that's all I really need to say about those. And we would plan to hold this item for a month for public review. Right. So you would you need a motion then to accept this and place it on file?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
Just that.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's done. Okay, Mr. Uckman would like to talk about item 6B. So I suggest we start off on item 6B. Can you start?
Well, essentially, this is to fulfill a work plan item from last year, which was delayed for a bit, to bring before the board a discussion about its capacity or interest in contributing funds or donation to the Mohammed Aquifer Consortium, which is in a mode to do outreach to seek these types of funds from governments and private organizations.
All right, Mr. Uckman?
I'll start off, Mr. Chairman, by apologizing if I got you guys out of order tonight and really forced you to skip around. I greatly apologize. I did not intend to do that. But in regards to 6B funding for the Muhammad Aquifer Consortium, though, again, I'm not here as a member of the MAC or Muhammad Aquifer Consortium. I'm part of the subcommittee of the MAC. I do know that they are seeking voluntary funds from various communities and counties, et cetera, throughout, and other organizations throughout the 15-county region. The money they're seeking, as I indicated earlier, that we were promised, ensured or guaranteed 3 years of funding by former Governor Blagojevich, and then he cut our own funding. And we, again, were able to, through conservative actions, were able to finish our project with only 2 years of funding. But as we look to 2014, one of our goals in the 09 report was to update it. And every 5 years. And so we made certain assumptions in 2009. Some of those assumptions dealt with population. Some of them dealt with business development that may happen in the 15 county areas and other assumptions. And we were right on a lot of those, but we were wrong on many of them. And so we need to go back, update that report, utilize the best available data, and some of this, what Mr. Roadcap has provided, is some of the newer data we didn't have back in 09. So we need to be able to update our report. We need to be able to reach out and continue to do public education and need to follow through on the actions that were in that 09 report. Unfortunately, as I said, all of that takes money. Just as anybody else that comes before this body and is doing a project, they all need money. And so we were asking, again, many groups and organizations, including government bodies, to support our effort to voluntarily supply us with a contribution. I hope that after Mr. Winstanley and my discussion tonight, primarily on recharge, you see the importance of this, especially to Champaign County, with the sort of the bullseye being on us in the newly identified recharge areas. So I would ask that you give strong consideration to some voluntary funding to the Muhammad Aquifer Consortium so that they can supply funds to our committee to continue on work like this and continued public outreach and education on the aquifer.
Any questions from the committee?
It isn't a question, it's more just an overall comment. The county board does have a liaison to this consortium, and so maybe that individual can talk with the consortium about my concerns. And my concerns have nothing to do with my support on protecting the aquifer and finding out more about the aquifer and educating folks about the aquifer. But however, again, when I went on the consortium website, I don't see any data that helps anybody who has given funds and support to the consortium of how those monies are being spent. And I see that fundraising passes $70,000, which is good to see, but this is a public body that was established by state statute. So I would think it was rather important for some of that documentation to be added to the website, not names of people who contribute the macro information, so that if I were getting a request, and we are getting a request as county board members to consider supporting the consortium, I immediately went to the website to see how the monies have been expended. So,
if I could just add one comment, it's an excellent point. Obviously, it's important to describe how that money is judiciously spent. One ways in which the MAC does send out that information is issue a approximately quarterly newsletter to all the people who are on the mailing list, which is a very large number. Obviously, there's probably improved ways in which they can pass out information, but that's just one example. It should be. Okay.
Okay, you done everything you want to do, Mr. Uckman?
Thank you for the time of the committee tonight. Appreciate the time to address comments and address this issue. Again, it's something that is pretty important to all of us, and so we need to take some time to think about it and to move forward and try to develop some management of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move back to item 6A.
Okay, is an information item only. It consists of an annual update, which summarizes some recent or ongoing trends or new development relevant to the Champaign County land resource and management conditions. Those items selected are those that may not have been in the forefront or in recently before the board. So it's good to be aware of some of the things we're very busy working on that you may not have heard about recently. So that's primarily what this update consists of. So it has seven types of items here, and if you'd like, I'll just provide a very brief explanation about each category. The first is that an update with regard to the floodplain maps, which are in progress of being updated. Expect that process to be completed by the Illinois State Water Survey sometime during 2013. In the meantime, we're using preliminary maps, which are not really official, but that's all that's available online. We always could refer to the paper maps, but that's just a quick update of where we stand there. Next, transportation planning is very, very active at the Regional Planning Commission, and I just thought I'd provide a little blurb to explain that it's a 5-year kind of process. Presently, transportation planners are working to evaluate how the 2035 long-range transportation plan is being implemented, and at the same time gearing up to work on developing the 2040 long-range transportation plan. So the point here is simply to impress you with the ongoing nature of this transportation planning for primarily the urban areas of the county. Next is an item that relates to somewhat to what was discussed as earlier this evening, the development of a model water restriction ordinance, which relates to water supply for municipalities during times of emergency or drought, extended drought. The Regional Planning Commission has been contracted to develop a model water use restriction ordinance to be considered by all communities in the county so that it's uniform, a uniform type of response, and so that has a high chance of being effective. So the Regional Planning Commission is working on that. It's about midway through the process. We are also in contact with the Regional Water Supply Planning Committee members that you saw here tonight. Dr. Winstanley is on the Drought Committee. It's an amazing committee that has like 10 subcommittees. It's just amazing. So anyway, that's just a little update there, and it's a 3-month process, and we're about midway through that. Next, just a recap of the county board efforts to protect the Mahomet Aquifer. I know that's something you're acutely aware of. The sole source aquifer designation and the joining of a Central Illinois coalition of city and county governments to formally commit to entering a lawsuit if need be. Gearing down to the final 2 items relate primarily to recycling and that of hazardous materials here in the county. The county is working with the University Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant Program to implement a local collection program for pharmaceutical collections in the central Champaign-Urbana area with potential to in the future expand throughout the county. And this is one of There's not just one of these types of pharmaceutical collection programs, but this is really the only locally available program because there's one collection point presently in Carle Hospital, which is funded, and that funding source is questionable. So this is a very timely thing to have occur, and there's a high level of interest by representatives of the police and the sheriff to actually do this because they think it's a very effective thing. Also, household hazardous waste collections. The Champaign County Regional Planning Commission has received grant support from both the private foundation, the Lumpkin Foundation, and the Illinois Sustainable Technology Center to start a 3-phase study to seek a way to improve options for residents to have a better option than once every 6 years, once every 3 years, to find a way to dispose of their household hazardous waste. So that's a very exciting project. The first phase will take 6 months. It's an information collection phase. Last item on this list is a simple update with regard to the land disturbance, erosion control, and stormwater management ordinance that John Hall has worked on with the RPC. It's presently undergoing a legal review, and a public review process is pending for sometime during 2013. And this is, as I mentioned, an information-only item. Just highlight a few of the activities that are going on and have gone on during 2012.
Susan, a couple of clarification questions. On item 1B, transportation planning updates, I am aware that COATS is very busy with a lot of this planning. My major concern is that the way things are set up, there's a technical committee and then there's a policy committee. And the technical committee, because it's made up of staff, tends not to fall under the Open Meetings Act so that the public is notified, aware, packets, etc. And that's where the work is done. So by the time it gets to policy, it's more in a rubber stamp format. So, and I do go to these meetings, and so this has been a growing concern on my part. And the second is to E. I was aware that the water company was, I don't know if funding or sponsoring or what, the pharmaceutical disposal. You've indicated that that funding is precarious. Could you give a little bit more information about that?
Okay, I recently attended a meeting where that was expressed as a concern by the organizer from the Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant Program.
Okay.
And I know the funding for the existing one single point of drop-off at Carle Hospital is from the IEPA, which is a pretty scary place as far as funding goes sometimes.
Okay, thank you.
Questions? All right. Now let's move on down to items 6C.
Okay, that is a piece of, it's an update regarding the City of Urbana's grant. They've received they've applied for grant funding to work with the University of Illinois to incorporate a very small scale, relatively, food waste compost program at the Landscape Recycling Center. And this is a notice about their permit, which is probably required to be distributed to all jurisdictions. So there's no update to provide other than that this is their application and it will probably take weeks to process.
This is rather exciting, but again, we're slow to come on board for these kind of things. This has literally been mandated in San Francisco since 2009. That means throughout the city, and not just 10%. So I think this is exciting, and I hope that it's successful and that it will multiply itself throughout the other cities in the county.
Just to add on to that, what Ms. Petrie just said, I know for a fact Illinois State's been doing that, especially before they moved to their present location in Lexington. But when they were north of Normal, they're doing composting also with food items from the university up there. So it's been done locally too, and it does work.
Any further questions from the committee? Okay, thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
You're free to go. All right. Item 8, monthly report. That's you, isn't it?
Yeah, if there are any questions, we have the November monthly report. We'll be doing these monthly reports differently. You'll be getting a monthly report in your agenda. They will not be handed out at the meetings. So we're going to need another month to get caught up, but this will be changing.
Okay, any questions?
I have a question. John, is the permitting, any of the permits picked up any? I noticed November there's hardly any permits at all.
You know, I haven't had time to do the fiscal year review, but in terms of total numbers for the fiscal year, it was a significant increase over the previous 2 years. So permitting has picked up. It's not back to what you could call normal or what you would expect, but it's definitely picked up. And zoning cases are just about to drown us. Zoning cases are just, they're going like hotcakes, and it's hard to keep up with them. So we're very busy right now.
Any, yes, sir.
Yeah, John, talking about ZBA, we're still down to 6, right? And we have this restriction of location. We can't bring in someone who's already on the board from that same area. I asked you to find somebody. I'm sorry. And John hasn't yet, but yeah, we're twisting arms or trying to. It is a difficult position, we understand, because you have to be very knowledgeable. Is there some way that we could, I don't know, Deb, through the website or something, highlight that we need somebody for the ZBA? John, I mean, what kind of marketing can we do to get someone in on this?
I would suggest stop pointing out how difficult it is and just ask.
It is a simple, easy task.
It's not simple,
that-
but if you're
I know.
interested in it, it's a piece of cake. And that's
Okay,
really
it's a
all it
piece of cake.
requires is
All right.
people who are interested in the topic.
Okay,
Maybe they could hold their meetings down at the Esquire.
there you go. That'll work.
Okay, to this point, I have mentioned several times, and maybe we're limited by state statute, and John can add to this. Because of the geographic restrictions on the way things are written to be a member of the ZBA, is there a possibility of adjusting that so there's more elasticity?
The restriction regarding one member from each township is a statutory restriction, so that's inflexible. The other restriction is a local restriction as far as I know, and it makes a lot of sense to me. But the state doesn't require that members of the Champaign County ZBA only reside in the unincorporated area. The county board has always maintained that that is essential. Obviously, it makes a lot of sense. The last person that inquired, a former professor from the U of I, very knowledgeable about rural issues, but he was a resident of a village, and he did not live in the zoning jurisdiction. So given the current rules that the zoning board operates by, which are established by the county board, that individual could not serve on the ZBA because they didn't reside in the zoning jurisdiction. And that, I think, is really the most difficult challenge, because if you live in any of the villages, you're not eligible. There's a lot of sense with that, but it's a really significant hurdle also.
And the population of the townships is, some of them are very small. Go ahead.
Well, then, maybe, Chair, this might be an agenda item for this committee to talk about and explore that possibility of putting some more elasticity into the part of the criteria that the county board has oversight on. We do need to do something, and it isn't working, and the ZBA has been one individual short now ever since your father stepped down, right? Yeah, so that's been quite a long time, which is really difficult for that board, and maybe even unfair.
Okay, thanks. And I think that's why it's a 7-member board instead of a 5. And I might be rehashing old history. I shouldn't say old history. I might be rehashing history, but I mean, it greatly affects those of us out in the unincorporated area. That's where the impact of rezonings and variances and special uses greatly, and that's the thrust of ZBA. That's where it's impacted the most, and also largely to Environmental Land Use Committee too. That's where we're affected. And if you looked out in the county and you talk about small municipalities, generally all of them have zoning. The incorporated ones. They may not have. They might not have planning commissions. A majority of them do. You take, for instance, Pasodum or Ivesdale don't have planning commissions, but they do have active village councils, and they do deal with their zoning. They don't have exactly jurisdiction in a mile and a half, but the city limits, they take it pretty seriously, and if they need to expand, they do quite readily. And they're not really affected by so much the county. But you take unincorporated areas like Seymour, which, that would be fine to get somebody in from Seymour on this, and I've tried. And I think it's just the idea of people putting the time into such a position. It is 2 meetings per month, and coming out from, outside of the county or outside of Champaign or Urbana, outside the county, coming in and spending time 2-3 hours at a time doesn't sound very appealing, although I do bring up the per diem, which is more than the county board makes. So I dangle that carrot all the time too, plus mileage too, and I think Christmas and most of major holidays off too. But as of yet, we're still trying to work on it. So it's just something that, if I can do it, pretty much everybody out there in the county can do it too, sit on ZBA. But it's just one of those things that just need to find the right person, the right people eventually, because we're going to have another vacancy here this year too, probably. So, yes. So.
I appreciate that back history, but one of the reasons I brought it up is, as Ms. Monty has in our packet, the adjustment of the boundaries. And I'm just looking at the data and the statistics of the population.
But those in a mile and a half if you're in a mile and a half, you can be on ZBA. Yes. That doesn't exclude you from not being on ZBA. Yeah.
Right, but it's still getting pushed out and pushed out. So it's going to make it harder and harder as time goes on, and it depends on the rest of the members if they think it's worth a conversation on how to resolve it, taking into the account exactly what you talked about, and that is the unincorporated areas need to have good representation. Yeah, I'm not negating that at all. I'm just trying to solve the vacancy issue.
I would just want to point out that even though we've been short a member for almost a year, the attendance on the ZBA is always very good, and we always have enough for a meeting. Once we have enough for a meeting, we have enough to do anything the board needs to do. So I think your constituents are not seeing things slow down for that reason. It is a risk that at some point we could we could encounter a difficulty, but so far we've been able to get by.
Any further comments? Oh, I think we're done.